Okay, thank you very much, guys. So this is our last session of the day. We're going to talk about IoT security and some of the challenges that exist in that industry at the moment and some of the really good work that Copper Horse are doing around vulnerabilities in IoT devices. So I'm going to hand over to Chris Bennison from the IoT SF to introduce the session and a little bit about what we're going to discuss. If you do have any questions, same as the other sessions, please do feel free to, ask them there and then, and we'll accommodate those into the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jen. First of all, thank you very much to Secarma for letting us be a part of this vulnerability management day. I've travelled down from Edinburgh. Mark has travelled from London, and it's just taken him 7 hours. So, yes, Manchester was a good sort of midway meeting point. We're here to discuss the latest edition of the State of Vulnerability Disclosure Usage in Global Consumer IoT report. It's been produced by Copper Horse, and Mark is representing Copper Horse today as one of the report's authors, and I'm representing the IoT Security Foundation, as mentioned, and this is a joint report between both of those organizations. The report is a barometer for IoT security maturity. It tracks one deceptively simple question. If a security researcher finds a vulnerability in a connected product, is there a clear, responsible way to report it? So the 2025 data tells a story of progress in this report, but it's also of persistent fragility. Now, we see a 40% figure of global consumer IoT manufacturers offering a way for researchers to contact them. That's an improvement on the previous year's report. Retailers are showing stronger compliance now. Regulatory pressure is mounting from the UK's PSCI Act to Australia's new rules and the EU's CRA, Cyber Resilience Act. And yet, nearly 60% of manufacturers still provide no clear reporting channel. The projected path to full adoption is the year 2040. So today's conversation isn't just about percentages, it's about what the numbers represent. The difference between compliance and commitment, the tension between regulation and real security culture, the growing divide between major brands and the long tail of obscure manufacturers, and perhaps most importantly, whether vulnerability disclosure is becoming embedded as a norm or merely implemented as a legal necessity. So the report that we're going to be talking about today is unique because it measures something visible. It's the public face of a company's security posture. But what it really signals is something deeper. How seriously manufacturers take accountability when flaws are inevitably discovered. So with that framing, I'm delighted to be joined by one of the report's authors, Mark Neve, to unpack what the data tells us, and more importantly, what the data doesn't tell us about the future of IoT security. So we'll get into it. The first question that I'd like to ask you, Mark, is about report history and progress. So the report is in its 8th year now. Things must have been pretty different when this started out. Can you explain a little bit of the history of the report?
Yeah, sure. So, we first started the report in 2018. It feels like it was quite a different landscape back then, even though it's just 8 years ago. But sort of IoT as a sort of vertical, it was kind of in its infancy. There was things considered to be IoT before IoT, connected sort of minimal devices, but it became kind of a big thing with things like webcams, smartwatches, all these sort of different things. Now, the sort of problem you had with things like webcams was there was news articles about people buying these cheap Chinese webcams that they'd be using for baby monitors, and people were basically hacking into them very easily, shouting at children. There's news articles sort of explain this. Also, these devices back then, they would be used quite often for botnets, and the reason being that these companies didn't have a very good sort of security policy, if at all, Their products all had default passwords, and the default passwords were available in the user manuals. So all you had to do was find an active webcam. So there's a search engine out there called Shodan. You can find connected devices. You can find webcams. You can find IoT devices. You go find the user manual. It's got a default password. It's usernames, admin, passwords, admin. Most people don't reconfigure the devices when they install them. It's a sort of an implicit trust. So it's really easy to get into these devices. So the reason the report came about in the first place was, how do you measure the security posture of all of these companies? Well, your first one is you buy all the devices and you test them all. Well, nobody's really going to be able to do that. Which do sort of almost like a spot check where they'll buy 10 devices of a certain type and test them. But what gives us a really good idea of the perspective of companies is whether they have you have an ability to contact them, but also whether they have a vulnerability disclosure policy. So we went off and we created a methodology where we looked at all the sort of most popular products on websites, so Amazon, Currys, PC World, Argos, all the sort of major retailers, and then just pick all the major products and then go off to each of the manufacturers and have a look and see if they have a policy or any way to contact them. So I think on the first one, what was it? We had about 300 odd manufacturers. I think it's 330 in the first report, and 9.7% of them, so I think it's about 32 manufacturers, had a policy. So less than 10% in 2018. Now, as time has sort of moved forward, you've had the PSTI Act, which I'm sure you've spoken about already today, which now requires every manufacturer to have a policy, obviously no default passwords as well as software updates, all these really good things for security. 2025 rolls by. We have at this point, just under 500 companies in our report, and it's 40.3% or 40.53% of them that actually have a policy. So, that's sorry, that wasn't too long. That's a short history of 8 years of the report.
So Mark, actually, some of the people in this room won't have heard of the PSTI Act. So I wonder, could you give us a bit of a flavour of what it is and why it exists?
Well, the bit that's sort of important to vulnerability disclosure itself, it is a much wider ranging act, but the bit specifically which came from IoT was the UK government put out the Code of Practice. So it was 13 provisions on things that manufacturers should do in order to make their products secure. So the first three of them, which were enacted into the PSTI Act, were no default passwords. You must, for the life of your product, tell people how long you'll be giving them security updates. And the third one is that you must have a vulnerability disclosure policy along with a contact point where if people find a vulnerability, that they can contact you. So that was the sort of the key takeaways. There was another 10 provisions in there, things like protecting user data, disposal of products when they reach the end of life. So it's sort of just a sort of smaller part of that was taken, but that's the sort of the key bit for IoT.
All right.
Okay.
So the percentage that you've just mentioned, Mark, 40.53%. That's the headline figure. And I want to talk about if that's progress or a problem, because the report shows that 40.53% of manufacturers now have a vulnerability disclosure mechanism, and that's up from 35.59 last year. Last year being 2024, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
So should we see this as meaningful progress or as evidence that adoption is still far too slow given the regulatory landscape?
I mean, the first point of it is in 2024, it was made law that you had to have a policy and a way for researchers to contact you. And yet we have only 4 out of each 10 manufacturers actually with that in place. So clearly it's nowhere near where it should be. But actually, to focus on the positives, since we did this, we've seen every year improvements. And actually, between 2024 and 2025, we had the biggest jump with, I think, what you said, just over 5%. It's the most significant jump we've had in manufacturers. So actually, yes, it's positive. However, potentially what is coming with the CRA may make that, hopefully we'll get a significant jump on this in the next couple of years. But yes, it's not where it should be, but it is getting better.
Okay. So the 2040 full adoption projection, that timeline to reach 100% adoption has moved from 2045 to around 2040. What would need to change structurally or culturally to dramatically accelerate that curve?
So hopefully what does change it, hopefully, is the Cyber Resiliency Act, in that the idea is that you have a CE cybersecurity mark on all the products. Now, what makes the CRA so important is that it's not just manufacturers, it's importers, it's retailers. Everybody has responsibility to make sure that products that are sold in the EU are secure. That they conform, that there is a way to contact people. If you find an issue of security research, you find an issue with a product. So the big problem is manufacturers manufacture products in order to make a profit. Now, the sort of higher end manufacturers think about security. You want to design security in from the point where you build the product. Actually, retrofitting is significantly more expensive, and that's a really important lesson that people learn. As we're in cybersecurity, they learn it's quite a hard lesson to learn. But I think you need to bring everybody up to you bring everybody up to a minimal level, and that's the only way that I think you can make this significantly better.
Okay, Jen, do Secarma customers often come to you who sell into the European market and are unaware of CRA?
Plenty of them. So we actually run an IoT tested service. So there's two levels of it. One of them is just enough to cover PSTI. And the other one is against a much larger standard, the European ETSI standard that covers 13 different controls. So yes, we're still talking to lots of IoT device manufacturers who, A, don't know there's legislation in the UK, and B, don't know anything about the CRA. In fact, we're doing a piece of consultancy in the next couple of weeks with a manufacturer around, moving towards compliance with CRA. So some know about it. If you've not heard of the CRA, it's the Cyber Resilience Act, and it's going to impact connected devices and software that's manufactured as well. So it's a little bit more wide-reaching than the current legislation that we have in the UK. But yeah, we are starting to have conversations, but I would say the level of awareness is still worryingly low, which then impacts businesses because you're not able to select devices based on them having met a standard. So your supplier due diligence becomes even harder. So which is why it's really important that we do ask the industry to do better.
It's a common thing, isn't it? Just to paraphrase you, that companies want to be compliant just enough with the legislation. Not necessarily secure, but just compliant.
Just one thing with the CRA to say. Any product with a digital element is what they specify as having to, have the minimum of what the CRA requires. And it's quite like a digital element. If it's got software, if it's got any of that, then it falls under it. And it is a huge piece of sort of legislation. So yeah, it's interesting. It's still evolving at the moment, but yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the threshold test and why timelines matter. So only 27.7% of manufacturers passed both parts of the threshold test for this report. That's policy and timeline information. Why is timeline transparency such an important differentiator in assessing maturity?
It's interesting there, isn't it? The number you come up with there is, does it 27%?
27.7%.
So even though 40% have a policy, only 27% actually have a timeline. So You can, if you're a security researcher and you find a vulnerability in somebody's product and you say, you've got an issue, at that point, they're not under any sort of requirement on themselves to say that, we're going to fix this and we're going to fix this, that we're going to actually acknowledge that you've told us you've got a problem, or that we're going to fix this within 30 days or 60 days. They're not holding themselves to any requirements, which is why, we made the threshold test in the first place. So you hit both, you get green. You hit one of them, you get amber, and you hit neither of them, you get red. So you can immediately see, even though companies have a policy, the fact they don't, they don't have timelines in there, this drops off quite significantly, the numbers. But it is, if you're creating a product or software or anything like that, you need to sort of hold yourself to account to it. So normally, if somebody reports a vulnerability, you want to be getting back to them between 1 and 3 days, and then you say, we will, if this is an easy fix, we'll fix it in 30 days. If it's a hardware issue, often that the timelines can stretch out longer because it's much harder to replace. You develop new hardware and replace it if it's a hardware vulnerability. But the timeline is so important because it gives everybody exposure. Everybody understands at this point exactly, where the deadlines are, where the hard deadlines are on trying to get this resolved. Because as soon as somebody finds a vulnerability in your product, there's a known vulnerability. Now, it may only be that person who knows it, but somebody else can find it. And you can, expose personal data or whatever the issue is.
Okay, so in the report, the companies are actually listed green, amber, and red, aren't they?
That's right.
And we've got a QR code to put up on screen. Just so that everybody can actually see the report and see if
Would you do that now, Chris?
Oh, right, okay, thank you very much. I wasn't sure whether it was on the screen or not on this side. Oh,
there you go.
There we go. So you'll be able to see the report that we're actually talking about. Just to go off script, in last year's report, there was a couple of very curious companies who I didn't think were involved in IoT security. They were both fashion houses. One was Emporio Armani. One was Michael Kors.
Yeah.
What are they doing in terms of IoT security?
In terms of IoT security, nothing. But in terms of IoT, they have a watch. So they have a smartwatch. Now, the smartwatch, I think the same manufacturer made smartwatches for 5 or 6 different retail brands. And actually, if you look in the 2025 report, they're all gone because the manufacturer who created them watches went out of business. So they shut down. We don't know quite why that was, but I think about 5 watch brands disappeared from this year's report.
Right, okay, I was curious that they weren't here this year, so that answers my question as to why. Okay. Resellers as market gatekeepers is what I'd like to talk about now. The reseller dip test shows major improvements, with some resellers achieving 100% adoption in the UK, even though this is a global report, achieving 100% adoption among popular products. Do you see resellers becoming de facto security enforcers in the consumer IoT ecosystem?
They're certainly going to be part of it. As I said before about the CRA, importers, manufacturers, and retailers will all be required, to have some say in this, and it is, it is certainly a huge issue. That we found this year, actually, just to go into the numbers a little bit. So in the UK, we had 3 retailers who had, when we looked for their top products, every product, the manufacturers had a vulnerability disclosure policy. So all their best sellers. So that was Argos, John Lewis, and Curry's PC World. So they're doing really well. And even, as you said, it is a global report. So we've got like the US manufacturers who themselves were significantly better this year. I don't have exactly the stats to hand, but like Walmart, I think in the 2024 report was something like 10%. They're up to like 70, 80%. So it seems like a lot of the retailers are, doing a lot better than they were. You do have a problem though with the sort of huge online retailers. So people like sort of Amazon, who sell such an enormous breadth of products, from manufactured all across the world, they seem to be more difficult. It will be harder for them to get up to the same level, but hopefully, laws and legislation forces them up to that level.
Okay. So the long tail risk is what I'd like to address just now. So you suggest the real insecurity may now lie in the long tail of lesser known brands. So we just talked about popular brands. How significant is that risk compared to the large volume brands that are improving?
Oh yes, it's absolutely huge, and these sort of brands. And I was talking to a pen testing friend of mine, and he was saying that some of these kit that you can buy now. So this is the sort of low end, the long tail white goods equipment. They're running like 25-year-old kernels on the software. Like they're running old hardware, and if this works as a manufacturer, why would you change it unless somebody forced you? You have a product, you have hardware, you have a set of software, all of this works. You wouldn't redesign it unless you were forced to. So the long tail thing is a real problem. And a lot of these companies as well are companies that you've never heard of. One of the products we have in the 2025 report that I think is sold, I think it's at Walmart and possibly somewhere else. It's a GPS tracker. It's a white box with a battery in it, and there's no manufacturer. There's no name of a manufacturer on this product. So we're trying to search GPS tracker, trying to look for a user manual. So we find a user manual that is applicable for this device. And there's no manufacturer, there's no address, there's no email address, there's no way. You don't know who. It's a 6-page manual that tells you how to connect the product. That's it. So it feels like this sort of long tail ones don't always want to be found or really care about security at all. So yes, it's a problem, and you just don't know what these people are doing, or if they have ever any intention of improving their security posture.
So Jen, we just suggest lesser known brands, but if you buy an IoT device from a well-known brand, it's secure, right?
Well, not automatically, and definitely make no assumptions. So I think what's a shame at the minute is a lot's been done to help consumers, so individuals who to buy better IoT devices, and yes, it's not perfect, and there are plenty out there that still pose a massive risk. But actually, businesses right now don't have the same level of help and protection. So what I would say is, when you're buying IoT devices for businesses, assume nothing, because actually the legislation doesn't yet cover those devices. So you are, as a business consumer, to an extent on your own, figuring out how to buy IoT devices. Now, there are some other schemes that are running. Well, there's one in particular run by the police called Secure by Design. So if you buy a device that's part of the Secure Connected Devices scheme, you've got some assurance that that's been through some testing in terms of, does it have some basic security controls, and does it, if there's an associated app, has that been certified against a security baseline? So that's a good place to start. But you should still do all that same due diligence that you would do if you're buying any other service into the business, and still ask for test reports, ask those questions around data sovereignty. Where does your data live? Who has access to it? Ask all those same questions about sub-processors, who else has access to your data, and what other providers that organisation are using to make that system work. So still do all that same due diligence, because as of now, you are not protected as a business consumer.
Okay, so Mark, let's talk about proxy disclosure and bounties. So with 8% of manufacturers using proxy platforms like HackerOne and BugCrowd, do you think outsourcing vulnerability disclosure strengthens security posture or distances companies from responsibility?
So HackerOne, as an example, it's a platform where they offer for security researchers and aspiring pen testers, like lots of puzzles and ways to improve their sort of skill set. which is it draws people in, people with a sort of a mind who like to break things and solve puzzles is probably the better way of saying that. So actually, putting your policy on that or working with one of these companies to actually, first of all, develop your policy to something that makes sense, because you as a manufacturer or developer may not understand, how we're supposed to create a policy. So actually working with these is a really good idea in the first place. And then you then get like a pick of, if you put up sort of bug bounties, or you say, like, this is what we'll allow you to test. You've got then lots of security researchers looking for things to test, because people like to get a CVE, the people like to find a vulnerability. We've had CVEs in a developer as well, where people put the CVEs, so the vulnerabilities they found, the CVEs have been registered and said, this is you found a new vulnerability. That's great on somebody's CV. If somebody's a pen tester, they want to be showing like all the ways that they've managed to break systems in a legal and compliant manner. And that's the whole point, of having your disclosure policy and saying that, we'll let you pen test these parts of our network. So actually, I think it's a great idea, and it does really help on both sides. It helps you engage with the security researchers, but also it helps manufacturers understand, what they need to do.
Jen, we were talking about pen testing earlier on today in this session. Does that ring true for you?
So as Secarma, our pen testers regularly find new vulnerabilities. Our disclosure of them depends very much on our contract that we have with customers. Some customers who are some well-known brands, we have agreements where we won't disclose their CVs. But I know that, our pen testers love finding those, and it's a point of personal pride. It's very exciting, all gets shared internally, but we're not always allowed to register them.
Let's move on to response efficiency versus policy existence. So, Mark, you point out that having a policy is meaningless if response times are poor. Should future editions of the report weight responsiveness more heavily than simple policy existence?
You see, that's a question I keep thinking about, because your policy in itself is so important, because you can set out in the policy, you can set out rules of engagement. So you can say, like, this is our platform. We want you to test this area. We want to test like whatever our login box or something, let's say. But we don't want you to perform denial of services on our platform. This is really sort of simple, obvious things. Because there's certain areas where you may think you're secure, but it's good to let somebody else have a look at. So. It's kind of when it's just to summarize it with our RAG status. It's like, I'm not sure quite how we weight timelines into that, but it's something we've been talking about for a couple of years now. Is like how important timelines are. Do we, I don't know, probably a plus or a minus possibly on a red, amber, or green, but then you're sort of really starting to muddy the waters there. But yes, it's certainly something we're thinking about.
It's a requirement in legislation as well, isn't it, to have disclosure timelines. So I suppose if you've not got those, you're only actually partially compliant with that element, therefore not compliant with the law.
Yep. Okay, the human side, researcher trust. You include examples in the report of both positive and problematic researcher engagement. In your view, what is the single most important cultural shift that manufacturers must make to build genuine trust with security researchers?
So I was just thinking, there's an example in the report, and I'll paraphrase it quite quickly, but it's just about really interaction with security researchers, because manufacturers and people who are creating platforms don't always kind of understand who they're talking to, and what they're going to get, from a security researcher. So I think there's we okay for time?
Yeah.
Right. There's the example we've got in the report, but it's York City have they used to have an app. So an app that you can see when your bin day is.
A football club.
York City Council. Sorry, sorry for for the
What's the football club doing with something like that? But
I'm sure they probably do have apps. Most of the football clubs these days. So when your bins are due and you're like Hampshire Recycling, you're doing all the sort of local stuff. What's going on? Security researchers looking at the app, and they have like a leaderboard of who's best recycling or whatever it is. And when they actually looked into the data that was behind the leaderboard, it exposed usernames, it exposed passwords. This is all open, like in the clear, all this data. Home addresses, email addresses, phone numbers. So everything you registered with was available to anybody who sort of poked behind the scenes and quite easily as well. So the security researcher emails the council to say, you have a serious vulnerability here, you need to resolve this. So they accept they get the email and they email them back. Now, the problem is at this point that the council's email system didn't allow them to do external email addresses that weren't trusted. So their email never went back to the security researcher. So at this point, the thing's completely cut. So the council panic and believe that the security researcher is basically blackmailing them for taking all this data as in they've stolen it. And they in fact tweeted to say that somebody had stolen or somebody's blackmailing them for all the data and they were going to inform the police. So they did. They tweeted this out. The police then got involved. It was investigated. And very quickly, it was obvious that this wasn't, the issue. It was an internal issue with them, and it got resolved quite quickly. But it just it shows if you don't have a process in place, if you're not testing, building a process is testing them, making sure that works. If you're going to put in a policy, you at least want to make sure that, that you go, okay, somebody's going to contact us externally. We'll just create a new email address, and then we'll email them, and we'll follow the process. And if just a simple piece of advice, you create this process, take one of your GitHub, if you're developing software, take one of your Git issues, post it as a vulnerability, just run the process through and just test it. But this is a sort of the disconnect where people go, okay, we've put it in place, but they don't know that works, or that the process works, that the policy works. I think that's the serious issue there.
okay, are we okay for time just now, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're on the last one now.
Last question there. Recommendations for attendees then. So from your report research, what is the best practice that you would recommend for anyone looking to implement the vulnerability disclosure?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do a little bit of this, and you can carry on if you like, because what I will say is there are two really good documents out there. So the UK, the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, they have a document that you can go through, and it explains all the details on how to create a good policy. Also, plug the ITSF as well.
I will.
They also have a best practice document as well, which is great. And yeah, there are documents out there that explain all the steps, all the things you need to do. And there's definitely more steps you can go through, more other options. But yeah, please.
Yeah, definitely. So really do look at the devices that you're buying and their security credentials. But also we're back to now really kind of basics of IT and cyber hygiene. So making sure that those devices are on segregated networks. They're so much easier to compromise by the small nature of the computing power they have. That make sure, you install those on separate networks so you've not got your CCTV running on your corporate network, as our friends at Jaguar Land Rover discovered to their annoyance, that those flat networks are a disaster in these situations. But yeah, also ask those same questions of them as a supplier that you would any other type of solution that you bring into the business. And keep asking, because every time there's a firmware update or a software update, that's potentially a new attack surface that's been introduced onto that device. So that one-off audit before selection isn't quite enough. You need to do it regularly.
Okay. So this QR code, it takes you to the report, but not only that, It also takes you to the open data. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Mark?
Yeah, sure. So we've got so every year we've run the reports, which are all the same. You can get access to all 8 years of reports, and we give out all the open data. So all the research we've done, saying whether people have policies, whether they have bug bounty programs, whether they have security.txt or security page, all that information, we release in open data. It's JSON, CSV, ODS, I think it is as well. So if you want to grab any of the data to play with it, feel free. We've had people look at it before and question us, email us and ask us questions about it. So yeah, it's all available for people that do what they wish.
Okay, we're wrapping up now, I guess, but the one thing that I wanted to get in just before the end, as I said at the start, this is a joint report between the IoT Security Foundation and Horse, and Secarma are one of the 100 members of the IoT Security Foundation. And we've got chapters around the world. We've got one in Bangalore, we've got one in Chennai, so those are the two in India. We've got one in Houston, Texas, we've got one in Amsterdam, and we're currently in talks for one in Melbourne, Australia, and one for Silicon Valley as well. But we'd like to start a chapter in Manchester. So if anybody in the audience today is interested in getting involved in the IoT Security Foundation, please come and have a chat with me, because we want to have more activity in the city of Manchester or surrounding area, and that will involve Secarma, hopefully, as well as a few other member companies as well. So yeah, please approach me if that sounds like something that you would be interested in. Jan, I think that's
Yes,
time
thank you
now.
so much, Sir Chris and Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, your journey was so beautiful to get here, but thank you for still continuing with it.